Hi everyone, thank you for watching, for coming back to watch again. Welcome back to our kitchen table. I have a cup of coffee. The window is open because it is an unusually warm November day, so I will open it while I can. The story that I want to tell you today it's actually the most important story ever. Not just the most important story in the Bible, but the most important story anywhere ever. And it's the story that we usually talk about at Easter time, because the event that happened is the thing that we celebrate most at Easter time. But it's such an important thing. It's really not just a once a year something to think about. It's an event that changed everything. So if this happened, then it changes everything, whether it's November or February or August. For the rest of your life, it changes everything. So it's good for us to talk about it more than once a year. So last you heard, I believe you would have had a story last week about the death of Jesus. And let me give you a detail from the Gospel of John that not all the Gospels include, but John tells us about it. He says in John chapter 19 that while Jesus was hanging on the cross, there were some women who loved him who came and clustered around the cross to be near him while he was dying, because they loved him so much, and they wanted to give him whatever encouragement they could. So it says, standing close to Jesus' cross were his mother, Mary, and his mother's sister, right, his aunt, and then some other women. And one of the women mentioned is called Mary Magdalene. So you may have noticed there were a lot of Marys in the Bible, in the stories about Jesus. It was just a popular name. A lot of moms and dads called their little girls Mary at the time. So there were a lot of Marys. Mary Magdalene was there at the cross while Jesus died. Jesus had driven 12 evil spirits out of Mary. She had been in such a bad way. She was oppressed and crazy and sad and out of control. And Jesus had come and sent these evil spirits out of her and given her liberty and life. And she just adored Jesus for what he had done for her. So that day, as Jesus was hanging on the cross dying, Mary just felt so desperate. So very sad that Jesus, the best man she'd ever known, would die in such a terrible way. But she was there when he died. So then they took him down from the cross. There's a picture here. They took his body down from the cross, and they carried it off, and they wrapped it in cloths, linen cloths, and there was a special cloth to go over his head, and the cloth was wrapped all around him, and then they placed his body in a tomb. So it was kind of a rocky, almost a cave, with a shelf in there that had been carved out where they could place a body. And then there was a large, heavy stone that was rolled in front of the tomb. Big and heavy, and it would take strong men to move that tomb so that people couldn't just come and go. So that Saturday, it was the Jewish day of rest, and nobody did much of anything. And for Jesus' disciples and his friends and these women who loved him, it was just a somber, sad day. They just could not get their heads around it, that Jesus was dead, and that these things had really happened. And they were just torn apart by it. Their hearts were just broken. And somehow they got through the day, that Saturday, and went to bed and slept as best they could. But Mary Magdalene, on that Sunday morning, was awake very early. And John tells us that early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. So you need to imagine, it's something like 5 o'clock in the morning. And most everyone is still sleeping, but Mary is awake, and she wants to just go to the tomb and be by the place where they've laid Jesus' body. So she went to the tomb early, the sun maybe just starting to peek up above the horizon, and she saw that the stone had been taken away from the entrance to the tomb. Now, this didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. It had been nighttime, and now you would need big strong men to move this stone, and what's going on anyway? It didn't make any sense. And to have this on top of everything else, it was just too much. Mary was just she was just beside herself, confused and upset, and so she ran to go and find Jesus' disciples where they were staying. And she found Peter and John, and she told them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him. And she was just so upset. And Peter and John were confused. They didn't understand what was going on. But they got up and went to the tomb too. And it says they ran to the tomb to see what was going on, because they were quite agitated and upset. And there's a fun little detail here that John ran faster than Peter and reached the tomb first. And John got there and he peeked into the tomb. He stopped at the door to the tomb, but he looked in and he could see that the cloths, the linen cloth that they had wrapped Jesus' body in, that they were lying there. And then Peter came chugging up behind him. And when Peter got there, he didn't stop at the door. He went right on in. And Peter saw not just the cloths lying there, but he also saw the special cloth that would go over the head, and it had been folded up neatly, and it was sitting off to one side from the rest of the cloths. And then it says that John got up his courage, and he also went in and he saw. And here's what it says. It says that John saw and believed. Well, what did he believe? He believed that Jesus was alive. Now, what you need to understand is they didn't expect it. They didn't think this was going to happen. They thought it would be just the same way as everybody else, that when you die, and that's all. Even though Jesus had told them to expect it, they didn't expect it. They didn't understand And so it was a surprise. And for John to see the cloths and the empty tomb and to believe that Jesus was alive, it was a step of faith for him to believe something that he didn't see yet, that he didn't understand yet, but he believed that Jesus had somehow won over death. And then the disciples went back home. What about Mary? What about Mary Magdalene? Peter and John had gone, but she was still at the tomb, and she was still very upset and didn't understand. And for her, John was ahead of her. Mary wasn't there yet. She couldn't get her head around it. And it says that she stood crying outside the tomb. She wept, which is hard crying, right? Loud crying. She couldn't stop. She just cried and cried. And then, with tears still coming down her cheeks, she went over and she looked in the tomb. But she didn't just see the linen cloths. She saw something different. It says she saw 2 angels there, dressed in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been. And another thing, what's this now? Who are these guys and what's going on? But they spoke to her. They spoke to her kindly, and they said, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she said, they've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they've put him. And then from behind her, there was a voice. There was somebody else. As she turned away from the tomb, there was a man standing there, and she didn't know who it was. She was crying. She was upset. But here's this man, and he says to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And he says it kindly and gently. "Who are you looking for?" And Mary was so upset. She thought, well, maybe he's the gardener who takes care of this place where the tombs are. And she just says, "If you've taken him away, sir, just tell me where. Show me where you've put him, and I'll go there." Do you know who the man was? It was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Mary." He just said her name. Just like that, Mary. And then it was like the clouds parted and everything became clear, and she knew it was him. And she just said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, which is what she called him. And she kind of fell on him and held him. Jesus said, go to my brothers and tell them what you've seen, and tell them that I'll see them soon." And so Mary went, and she told the disciples that she had seen the Lord. Now, she was the first person to see him alive. This woman, Mary Magdalene, had this great privilege of being the first person to see Jesus alive from the dead. And she went and she told them. And, for the rest of the day, the news was spreading around. But it was still only she who had seen him. And it comes to evening time, and they had gathered together to eat a meal, and they were in a closed space. They locked the door because they were still afraid of the Jewish leaders and what they would do. Would they come and arrest them too? They didn't know. But it says here that then Jesus came and stood among them. Even though the doors were locked, suddenly he was there with them. And it says that he said, "Peace be with you." peace be with you, because peace was what they didn't have. They had been so sad and torn up and confused, and they were starting to hear good news, but they didn't know how to get their heads around it. But he comes and he says, peace be with you. It's okay. It's okay. It's really going to be all right. Peace be with you. And then he showed them his hands. Why do you think he would have done that? He showed them his hands. Look, I want you to see them. What was in his hands? Well, you remember that he had been nailed to that cross. How did they do it? They took those big spikes and they just hammered them through. Probably down here in the bottom of the hand. And so both of his hands had a gaping hole where the nails had gone. But he wanted to show them, look, it's really me. It's really me. You can see by this, I was dead, but I'm alive again. And do you know what it says? It says the disciples were filled with joy at seeing the Lord. Wouldn't you be too? He had loved them more than anybody had ever loved them, and they loved him. And they had been so torn apart, but now, because he's alive, everything's new. Everything's going to be all right. The kingdom of Jesus is going to move, and people's lives are going to be changed, and it's going to go to the whole world. It's going to be all right. Thanks, guys, for listening. See you later.